Well, hi. This feels a bit strange, I have to say. I promise you this is very nearly the last you're going to hear from me. So it is, I have to say, a huge honour to close today after so many amazing talks over the last couple of days. But are we all feeling enthusiastic? Are we going to come away and make a load of cool stuff? Yeah. That's good, because we're actually going to start on a slightly more depressing note with a little bit, just a smidgen more politics. This is the last politics. Yesterday, we heard from Jess, who had been trying to keep on track of things for, I think it was a month she made it. And we obviously heard from Mina this morning, and I can't even imagine how both stressful and exhilarating that must have been to work on a project like that. But I think that even over here, there's been this real kind of flood of commentary coming out of the States, and I know we've got our own things going on, but every day it feels like I wake up and I go on Twitter and I sort of scroll through, and there's more and more to be absorbed. And amongst all of the range of different topics that are available, one that's particularly stood out for me is the issue of Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. And within this, I started to notice a slightly strange pattern. And that was phrases like this, even in news stories from this year, post-election, and regardless of the kind of political leanings of whoever was writing them. So amongst all of the announcements and the protests and the controversy and all the fun we've been having, I was pretty amazed that actually people were still bringing up website issues from 2013 in the same breath as actually talking about the impact of the repeal itself and of Obamacare, basically. So I don't know how much you actually know about it, but I think it's safe to say there were some problems. However, it seems like the previous website issues had actually become a reason to resent and politicize the Affordable Care Act all these years later. So there were problems cited with things like the strategy and the running of the project and the way that they approached the website that came along with that. But as you can see from the articles, people don't tend to think in terms of the specifics. They just actually associate it with the website or even the scheme itself. So when websites have problems, people actually remember. And if certain people consider it a failure, then it may not matter if other people don't. And so you find that this negative association is actually continued by Google. So when you start typing that in, all of the suggestions are negative. And this starts to actually influence the world around you. So we can see this with things like the fake news phenomenon, for instance. And I thought that was pretty bad. But what surprised me even more was when you Google website failure, you actually get all of these different references to either the Affordable Care Act or healthcare.gov. So you've got one up there, you've got another one down here, and then you've got another one up there, and you've got an image, and you've got related questions and related searches. So this is actually quite, an extreme example, a very topical one, bit of a cheap thing to get in, but it's not alone. So how many of you can actually remember either one of your projects or somebody else's digital project that has gone wrong? I mean, I know I can. These things hurt. And digital projects can be very notorious for this. What we can find is that failure can actually mean everything from a company maybe going bust through to the inevitable thing where somebody redesigns their website and everybody hates it. And then 6 months down the line, it's redesigned again, and everybody hates it and talks about how the previous one was so much better. So we've experienced this. But it turns out that this is very much human nature. And apparently, it's not just me, I'm not the only pessimist. We as a species are very negative. And I came across this really interesting paper called Bad is Stronger Than Good by apparently all of these people. Roy Baumeister gets cited the most, which I don't know if that's because of his gender or because he actually did most of the work, we'll never know. But the paper really discusses how negative opinions across things like first impressions and memories and relationships and feedbacks and loads of other things, the negative aspects are stronger. So it's why if anybody's ever come to you and said something really nice and something really negative at the time, your mind will probably sort of stick on the negative thing and hold on to that and kind of discard the positives. So I hope you have all been nice with your tweets and things like that. Anyway, this natural inclination to actually hone in on the bad things can be used to help us make better things. So when a website fails, it can be when the project fails, the website can often act as this focal point for all of the criticism. And they can become this fantastic kind of public magnifying glass for all of the issues that we might be facing. And the great thing about this is that we can use it ourselves to better understand some of the broader factors that might need addressing and to actually make our projects better. So I'd really like to talk to you today about this idea of kind of using websites as a starting point, not just as the end goal. And I'd like to ask you not just to make websites, but to actually use websites to start to point you in the direction of everything that could be maybe better, and see them as a bit of a tool for change as much as an end goal in themselves. And we can also use web technologies to actually start to improve the wider ecosystem and the world around us. These are different stages that we're going to go through. So we're going to have a look at how to identify issues in the first place. We're going to look at why problems start to exist. We can look at then how we actually apply this web thinking more broadly elsewhere. And then finally, how do we actually make this happen? How do we make things better? And at each stage, what I'm going to do is go through just a few activities that might be useful to you. The slides will be online later, so if you want to grab any resources, you can do that then. Now, first, we spent a bit of time together over the last couple of days. You know now what my favorite animal is, and that I'm very sad when it comes to my personal data. But I haven't really introduced myself properly. So to explain a little bit about why I think this is all useful, I'll give you a bit of background. But jumping quite far back at the start, my love of computing actually started in DOS and with NESs and consoles and stuff like that. I nicked this slide from Seb from yesterday, so this is actually his, and it was his marketing slide of the sort of NES box artwork. And this made me laugh because I sent my boyfriend a text saying, could you send me a picture of my NES box, please? Because I grew up in Southeast Asia, and we had an Asian variant, which was obviously just that much cooler than everybody else's NES. We also had lots of knockoff games as well, which were all slightly broken, which was really amusing. But this is my box, and I always found it really funny, and I never really realized that the European or the US NES boxes might be slightly different. Because what is going on with this kid's hands? If you notice, in between this picture being taken and if you jump back to Seb's one, they've obviously learned how to actually use pads. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what sort of gently cupping the controller is going to do, but anyway, that just made me laugh when I saw Seb's slide yesterday. So that was kind of how I got my start with wanting to interact with these amazing things that you can do things with and you can interact with. But I started my actual web career as a developer with a web agency. And at that point, we didn't really have front or back-end specialities. It was all quite general. And I worked across a huge range of technologies, including Cold Fusion, as we found out yesterday. So I started out wearing a lot of hats, sometimes literally. That has continued. And as time went on, I found that I was actually asking more and more questions whenever somebody would approach me with a new brief. And I started asking those to other people. I started collecting the questions together and creating documents for people like the sales team to ask at the start of projects. And eventually put together this kind of slightly terrifying mind map for the different things that might start to influence different technical solutions. And I found this when I was putting together this talk, and it actually stands up pretty well today in terms of principles, even though it was first created in about 2012, I think. So Jeremy actually mentioned some of them yesterday, and we've got things up there like performance, we've got devices, and at the time, the mobile web and all these kind of areas, amongst more kind of functional bits. But the reason that I started to collect these together was that where these things were thought about more upfront, the project seemed to have less problems. So this was my way to actually try and approach building better things. And because of this, my work started to get much more architectural and strategic. And I found that I really enjoyed working with people to ask these tricky questions and actually think about options. So over the years, my work really started to change. What was originally very technology-led became much, much more people-led. And I started a really small company a few years ago, and now I mostly work as a consultant on digital transformation projects, which is this term I've got a real love-hate relationship with, because it's just such a kind of wishy-washy, nothing-y term. But essentially, my projects are all about helping people make change happen and making the most of what technology can do to actually help them get there. Some people I work with have a really, really good view of where they want to get to and all the things they want to get better. And then other people have absolutely no idea where to start. But very often the website is an excellent place to start. Because, as I mentioned previously, websites can be this great public manifestation of underlying issues. And we can see this where we get projects where the old site was thrown out and the new shiny one gets put in, and it's maybe built with different technologies by totally different people. But 6 months, a year down the line, it starts to maybe have some of the same problems that they saw before, and it will eventually suffer the same fate. And the reason that it gets to this point is that we're negative humans, and bad is stronger than good. And so we start to focus on all these negative things and all the things we don't like, rather than remembering the good things of when it was put in the first place. So if we look at some common scenarios, these are the kind of things that people in boardrooms who were never previously involved in projects kind of latch onto and freak out over and fire people. And they're all symptoms of things that somewhere aren't quite right. So yeah, they need fixing, clearly. But the real question is why they happened in the first place. And we want to be able to flip everything around to become much more proactive and stop them ever happening at all. But the first step here is kind of gathering these symptoms together to help us to diagnose the problems that lie underneath. So a really good starting point that I do quite a lot are expert reviews, and I was trying to think how to describe them without using the word expert review, because they kind of do what they say on the tin. They're a chance to look over a site with a critical expert eye, and very often on the projects I work on, there is some kind of existing site, and what I do is I use this activity as a starting point to have some wider conversations. And I'm sure that you're probably, many of you, really quite familiar with them, because you do have them as part of a typical process quite often. And they might be done by people like UX team members. They often focus on things like usability and heuristics as well, which can absolutely help us up to a point. But I think that we can also do more. So if we put our developer detective hats on, we can sort of dig a little bit deeper. And I really like that Umar yesterday showed us some of the stuff that you can do with DevTools, and has shown us some really good resources to kind of dig deeper into those kind of problems. So yeah, look back at his points and sort of link that up with this. But these are some of the areas that I tend to focus on. And by no coincidence, many of those are actually the same areas that I had in my spider diagram initially. So some of them require a little bit more explanation than others. By responsive approach, I'm looking for a few things outside of just whether it's got media queries. So I'm speaking broadly about this concept of responsiveness, namely how much does it actually adapt to somebody's different situations. So have very small or very large screens being considered at a basic level? Is the whole page working off set widths, or is it much more elements or sort of component-led? And are there any evidence of ideas like progressive enhancement? So does it offer different features to respond to the device's capabilities? But also, have they thought beyond screens, as we heard a little bit about from Peter earlier? Can they adapt to different interfaces like voice? Have they thought about notifications? And also, have they used things like standards to be able to mark up the content so that that content can actually be exposed elsewhere? We've also got third-party integrations, which can have a huge impact on our sites. So you might find that you build the stuff that you can control really well, but if you have to plug in third-party things, yeah, maybe they're not built so well. Things like, for instance, payment processes, a really good example. You might find that they impose limitations on the experience you can create. Or, of course, waiting for data to be returned from these creaking back-end systems that might actually be housed in, like a room like this or a cupboard somewhere. So third parties can have a huge impact. And then there's one sort of section that I like to call sort of general attention to detail. And this is kind of a list that I've built up over the years. this is very often what my browser window looks like. So when I was asking yesterday about the whole favicon thing, have people thought about that? Have they thought about 404 pages, social metadata, microformats, all these kind of little things that we maybe know to look at? And these little things give a great indication of actually how much people have thought about their implementation, how much care they've put in. And it's a great test, actually, to see whether some things that we maybe take for granted nowadays, like HTML5 input types, a lot of people still don't include those. So the goal with this list in general is to get a really good high-level view of whether there might be kind of underlying rot in some places. So we want to find the symptoms that are most acute. And if a website's maybe really beautiful but horrendously inaccessible, then there's going to be quite a few conversations to be had there. And those conversations could probably start to tell us more than we can see on the surface. And plus, if you're in that situation, you should probably hire Sarah, because I think she's going to need a job soon, so you should definitely do that. But to put a little bit of structure around this, I've sort of collected together some references that I personally used. I've stuck them on GitHub, which you can find there. And it's really quite broad, which is intentional. And what you find is that some of the tools themselves are also quite broad, which I really like, because as we saw yesterday, this is a screenshot of Lighthouse, which is the Canary extension. And the focus is really to be a PWA checklist, but it actually does show you things like accessibility and performance as well. But whilst I've got this kind of set of things that I kind of refer to or want to keep in mind, it's very important to remember that a lot of these things are subjective. So there's not only your opinion, but also the situations that you're going to be looking at are very different. So you want to use tools, but you want to also apply your expert knowledge, which is why it's an expert review rather than just chuck something into a spreadsheet and follow all the tick boxes rule. So one example is that sites which use a lot of Angular tags might be really terrifying looking if you run them through the W3C HTML validator, for instance, but it might not necessarily be a problem. It might just be something that's due to the choices that you've made. And likewise, human eyes can sometimes spot issues that validators won't. When I was writing this, my mind kept jumping back to the Ryanair relaunch in 2015, which a load of people within the community kind of jumped straight on Twitter and started slagging off in that wonderful way that we have a tendency to do. And there was a conversation going on about how much the performance sucked at the time. And Tim Kadlec pointed out this in the source code that he'd noticed. So obviously they were aware of things. So you can sometimes find these interesting little nuggets of how somebody's approached a problem or things that they might be aware of or maybe not aware of. So when you go through this kind of process, you get a collection, a melting pot of things that could maybe be better, maybe grouped into different pots. And so we'll probably know which type of issue is causing the most number of problems or the most acute problems. However, the really interesting thing starts to be when you peel back those layers a little bit to diagnose why we're getting problems in those areas. So what we're after are the root causes of why something is actually occurring. And this is kind of like a metaphorical idea in that if something's wrong with the root of a plant, you're probably not going to see it blooming as it should be. So we want to be able to trace back down to the root of our symptoms and see what's happening. There's a couple of really good ways to do this, one of which is, it was invented by Mr. Sakichi Toyoda, and he actually founded Toyota. He invented things, and he came up with the 5 whys concept. So are we all familiar with the 5 whys? Anybody use this? Not as many as I thought. It's quite interesting. Okay, so when you face a problem, asking why 5 times asks you to dig down into that and see why it might be happening. It's really common with lean methodologies, so a lot of people tend to use it. So if we apply it to things like our development problems that we're seeing, let's assume maybe a testing tool has flagged that we've got massive images on our site and that's causing issues. So if you apply the 5 whys technique, some of you have got really good eyesight, we can see what we can get out of it. So, okay, you set out your problem statement, which is large images are causing our customers to experience performance issues. Why? Because they're not being optimized. Why? Because it's a manual process and nobody's doing it. Why? Because they're not really sure what's needed. Why? Because there's no references to look at. And why? Because nobody actually asked the agency to provide any documentation to state what needed to happen and how to do that. And so there could have been other root causes, things like maybe there not being a performance budget or designers not being aware of the impact. So you can have different root causes depending on your situation. And as some of you have seen, from this week onwards, it is absolutely acceptable to replace any root cause with Brexit. So that's fine. We can just all use that now. But what starts off being this very technical problem is actually a communication issue, and we'll come back to this in a little bit. Another tool you can use is Ishikawa, or fishbone diagrams. And rather than being a very linear set of events, these aim to view the problem through these different lenses. So what you've got is you've got sort of like your key problem, the diagram there. You'll have a set of different categories, and under each one, you'll start to write out your causes. And what you traditionally used this for was very traditional things like manufacturing processes. So those categories that you'd find around the side would be things like equipment or process or people or materials or environment. There's actually no reason why we can't use these less web-centric terms to discuss the problems that we're actually facing as part of our development processes. And when you started to do this a few times, when you started to actually dig underneath the problems that you're experiencing, you find that there tend to be a few patterns. So these terms are things that I experienced when I was working on a project alongside a big consultancy company. And again, you kind of think, it's one of those things that they're just, putting in and putting lots of pound signs around. But it actually makes a lot of sense, and it's something that I've seen come up again and again. And you might think that, well, I'm a dev, what are these silly words got to do with me? I just want to write code. But they probably do affect you more than you realize. Jumping around. So if we start with people as an example, people is not only our customers, it's also the people making sites, it's the business stakeholders, it's basically anybody who's involved in a project at all. And I think that we are fantastic about harping on about our users. We are just terrible about thinking a little bit closer to home. So there's a huge, huge difference between a website which is having performance issues because a developer is really early in their career and they maybe haven't been taught about things like service workers or HTTP2, and somebody who cares hugely, has years of experience, knows exactly what they want to be doing, but their timeline has been slashed in half, and they're just trying to get by. They're trying to get this thing over the line. So that's a problem about a company that probably doesn't respect their developers as much as it should. So Saren's talk yesterday, we need to think about everybody, and this really applies to our internal people too. Now, technology. Where technology isn't yet in place, but maybe it should be, we can obviously have issues. However, where it is in place, but it's not quite right, we can also have a lot of issues too. So you might be seeing symptoms occurring because of a particular technology choice. So things like where a CMS maybe doesn't think about accessibility as much as it should, it's not dealing with alt tags, it's spewing out a load of really terrible markup. We can we can do things to address this. So we can hack around with the product itself. We can fix it. If we're nice, we can maybe roll that out into the community if we can and solve everybody else's problems. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't solve the reason why that technology was actually selected in the first place. So we want to be able to make better technology choices in the future. Jeremy obviously talked about this loads yesterday. So how well does something fail? Do we have that forwards and the backwards compatibility? Are we making good technology choices? Are we thinking about scalability and extensibility, flexing up and down? Are we actually being limited by technology rather than enabled? Very often, where our technology choices are bad, that can be traced back to our strategy. So when you're being led by people who are looking at B, whatever B is, and a helpful graph of nothingness. When we make our decisions, we really need to do them with an effective strategy in mind. We need to think both tactically on the day-to-day level and strategically. So why are we doing something, and how is it going to change over time? Many of the issues that we're actually facing day-to-day can be traced back to these big strategic issues and leadership, rather than just being mistakes. I love this example that I think it's Phil Hawksworth retweeted last week. And it's an interesting approach to solving a technology problem with strategy. So what this is it's a FedEx office website. And basically, they've got a problem that Flash is on their site, and people maybe can't use stuff. So instead of actually fixing that, they've introduced a strategy of you can just have a discount if you enable Flash and go through with that process anyway. So when I'm talking about root causes and addressing things, you probably shouldn't be bribing people to use Flash. Well, if you want to, that's up to you, but hey. So anyway, process. This can be the process that you use to actually make or do something, or it can be the process involved in somebody doing something. So completing a booking process, for instance. And they're very often taken at face value, and it's excellent to actually question everything. So one of my clients was a further education college, and they had a site. They were looking to improve their online application process. And when we started to map that process out and look at actually what we could optimize on the web, it became apparent that actually wasn't where the problems were at all. So it was everything else that was happening around it. And when people had applied, they'd been accepted, they would still have to come in to enroll in person. And what they'd do is they'd bring in a load of documents to prove they were who they said they were. They'd fill in a load of forms, very often with the same details they'd already given us during the application process. And the weirdest bit was they had to sort of move around different rooms, see people, and get a sticker. And this sticker was mentioned by everybody, and it was all this kind of like revered terms, and it needed to be put on there. And so I kept trying to go, okay, what's the sticker? What's it about? Is it like a government thing? Is there some legal thing? You have to have a formal sticker? And it turns out that I always want to use the phrase olden days, but it's not like there's horses and carts involved. But at some point, they had a book which was full of stickers. And it was really important because that point, when they actually handed over the sticker and put it onto your form, was when you were formally in the college. You were enrolled. So it was kind of like a yes, this is official. And for them, it was also a way of managing their availability. So when the book was empty of stickers, there were just no more places. So it had this huge historical importance. But nowadays, obviously, there was no reason why we couldn't just digitize that. It was only the fact that everybody sort of saw it as this hugely important object that had led to it just being maintained and being accepted as something that had to be there all these years later. So sometimes the things that we think are absolutely crucial and we can't possibly leave out are exactly the things that we can leave out. And this thinking beyond websites as just nice little neat packages, interfaces, we want to think about all these things that go around them as well. And there are lots of things that can have a huge impact, which is what I want to talk about next. So as we've heard, web technologies no longer just mean public marketing websites. And as Peter showed us earlier, things like Electron can mean that there's not even necessarily a URL associated with a development. We can also think, if we want to, beyond the browser. We can build so much using web technologies nowadays. So far we've focused on websites being able to sort of lead us to these deeper things to fix, to hopefully make our websites better. So if our sort of visible tree and leaves are this indicator, then we'd look to the roots and see whether the soil is wrong or it's not got enough water or light or whatever. But it might be, to use that metaphor, it might be the wrong technology, it might be the wrong team structure, or lack of knowledge, things like that. But it's not just about being affected negatively. So in my example about replacing the sticker, we can basically apply our digital knowledge and our thinking to question everything and to try and improve the ecosystem around it. So hopefully, longer term, we can bring more benefits. And this is where we start to move beyond just delivering websites and actually into changing organizations' culture and relationship with web technology. So it's just about being a bit more proactive, not only delivering something, but actively looking about how the web can bring about positive cultural change and bring benefit into people's lives in the future. And so many companies that I work with have digital teams and they have resource, but they only ever let them work on, say, a public website. So that means they miss out on loads of cool ideas. And some of the best companies are actually doing so much more, and looking at digital and the web can actually change how they work. So last year, I got to work on a project that I absolutely loved, and it was one of those things that doesn't come along very often. I got in touch with the Formula One team and said, "Hi, I'd like to do some work with you." And they went, "Yeah, sure, okay." And you kind of kick yourself because that's the thing that they always tell you doesn't work, but apparently sometimes it can. Who knew? So their tagline was "Go for the gap." And I was tasked with being slightly cheesy, but I really loved it, digital gap finder. So somebody who could look under these kind of really traditional manufacturing processes they had going on, and to identify these areas where we could actually use digital technologies to benefit the team both on and off the track. And the team there were absolutely amazing. So they were really quite small. They were so strong, though, with their mentality around technology, really eager to try things out, and just want to do anything they can. So it's such an honor to work with really smart people like them. What we did was we started by looking at the operations side of things, basically mapping out the manufacturing process. So for those of you not familiar with these kind of things, I break it down into sort of 3 smaller steps. So those were requirement to design, order to manufacture, and then receipt to race. And so what happens is that essentially requests come in at the start, and that might be because they've run out of bolts in the factory, or it might be that they're on the track and there's been a crash and so something's been smashed up. Or what they also have is an aerodynamics team who will constantly look at if you shave a millimeter off there or change that angle, that makes the car go faster, so let's order a new front wing to do that, basically. So you have this constant kind of stream of inputs coming in. So those requests were captured in a number of ways, and then they went through quite a linear approval process of sign-off. You would update the master records for the car, so it's kind of a little bit like a pattern library in that respect. Then you'd go through procuring the parts, you'd receive them, you might have to assemble them or inspect them, but essentially then they would go into stock, and then they would go out to the race team. So hugely linear, hugely high pressure, and everybody wants everything now, and it's incredibly cost and time critical. So again, like any web project. So our goals were to do this, make the manufacturing process better and help the team. And these are things that could be from any digital project, really, if you swap out the racing words. So essentially, I was looking for things that we'd do to make a digital project great and just to apply them to their traditional processes. So if you're interested in kind of shaking up the way that a company does something, it's really nice to actually map out the processes because it lets people identify with what you're trying to do. And some of those might actually involve the public website, but others may have nothing to do with it. So in my case, it was absolutely nothing to do with it. So what we did was we mapped out a lot of the processes and a lot of the ways that people were working with information and data, the roles involved, the systems involved, the attributes that we had flying around, and I spoke to a lot of people about their common frustrations. And from this, we started to compile a list of pain points and gaps. When you map it out, you can start to think in terms of those areas that we've spoken about before. So could more team members remove a bottleneck if you've got a linear process like this? Or if you're seeing a lot of spreadsheets, can we add in some technology to make some benefits there? Or can we actually use some web technologies to do some quite cutting edge things or some things that people might not even know about in this world? And if you're looking to do stuff like this, there's loads of really good starting points. This is a customer journey map, so it's one of the sort of classic ways of picturing how things move through, what the flow's like. But just make sure you don't focus too much, again, on external customers or existing technologies that are already in place, and try and think a little bit bigger. The goal is to really champion things that we know from our digital work can bring benefits, but to do it more widely. So in Manor's case, we found there was actually a lot of stuff around lack of visibility, informal workarounds have sprung up, as we all know and love, bottlenecks, there's inaccuracies, loads of spreadsheets, loads of paper, people writing stuff down and taking it somewhere else. So the data capture could also really be improved there. So there's some stuff there where really basic web tools and principles can help. So there could be much better insight analysis for better decision making. You can remove some of the manual, tedious tasks and try and remove some of the human error as well. But there's a lot of opportunities that we found where they could actually use the web to gain this competitive advantage. So we'll come back to this in a little bit. But first, they used to refer to their cars as rocket ships and make liberal usage of the emoji, which was, if you know anything about the team and where they tended to place, a little bit optimistic, but it was very endearing. But there is something about this that I really love, and some of the talks today have really helped to drive this home, because I think we sometimes forget just how cool the technology that we get to work with is. And in some respects, so many respects, I suppose, when we've looked back to what's been happening in years like 2007, 2008, we're already in the future in so many respects. So when we're going through activities like this, as much as we want to look at the current problems and the current situations that we're in and try and fix those issues or do cooler things, we can also start to look towards the future and start playing around with how technology and the web and things might work. So Peter, again, gave a really nice overlap, I think, in terms of the call to just do things. And as we just heard, we don't want to wait for things like PWAs to be entirely supported across the board. Start using this stuff. If you see an opportunity to do something, do it. So I think the interesting thing for me as well is that stuff we've heard about again today, in particular, things like VR and neural nets, these aren't just necessarily for public-facing products. They can also potentially change the way that we work and change how internal companies work. So just think about that as much as you're thinking about how you can actually serve, again, the consumer, the user. Think about us as well. So at this point, I know that we've had 2 days of just enormous amounts of knowledge imparted onto us, and you're probably either sat there completely overwhelmed and just kind of like, I just need to get home, please let me sleep for a bit. Or you might be sat there going, no, I cannot wait to get going. And what was really nice was to see the hack evening yesterday and see everybody kind of being really excited to try out stuff that they've been enthused about. So how can we make this stuff happen? If you're raring to go, how can we make change happen? Well, as you expect, this is always kind of like a team effort to actually do more, and you're never going to make things happen if you're trying to change the entire direction of something on your own. So it's always helpful to bring friends along. But what I want to hammer home is that your technical brains can play a huge part in this, so don't just wait for people to kind of like hand you a brief or tell you what to build. You can actually come up with stuff. You can really evangelize what technology and the web in particular can do for people. So in the last section, I've just got a few examples of things that have really helped me on projects that I've worked on to get people on board. So the first of which is to communicate the improvements that you want to make. So you need to talk about what you want to do, and you need to get people really excited about that so they can come along with you. And there's different ways to do this. So it might be that actually you can go back to your bosses and you can go, I saw this amazing talk by Seb, and he's just got all the lasers, and so everything now that we do should involve lasers. And maybe your boss will be on board with that. I don't know. This is, I haven't had a boss in a while, so I'm just assuming this is how it works. That can be quite powerful, though, jokes aside, because actually, if you do have these things where you can actually point to the fact that people are talking about these at conferences around the world, people are writing about them, people are blogging about them, the more kind of resources that you can refer to, and the more resources you can create as well to help other people point to, the bigger we can kind of make these things, and the quicker we can help to drive adoption. So it is, again, as we heard just then, submit these requests, try and get people to actually think about these things and have conversations. But talking about it isn't the only way, and it's not enough for some people. So the old show and don't tell mentality can be best. So just to pick up the Manor story again, I had a midpoint project meeting with the directors to actually discuss what we'd found so far. Came in with a few ideas of what we could do next. And so there were things there like sort of physical web elements, stuff we could play around with the Arduinos, And we started off by taking 2 pretty straightforward ones forward because we wanted to get this kind of like excitement and build the momentum. So we chose to make data work harder and to become more accessible in the broader sense. And we also did some stuff to digitize and standardize requests that were coming in from all those different channels at the start. So what I did is I built a really quick prototype. I think it was just using Foundation. So it was, quick and dirty kind of thing, just to throw something together, take around the factory to illustrate to the different teams there how some solutions could actually meet some of the frustrations that they were facing. And how we could actually build these little tools really quickly just to jump on something. So this one was intended to just be a reference point for some key metrics so that people could grab it from a central location, because they had a load of stuff that was all tucked away in spreadsheets and really complex systems. So it's not rocket science at this point. But it was a really important exercise for me. Whenever I do something like this, it's this power of actually remembering that we live in a bubble, and that simple things like being able to take a picture from a device. People were kind of just looking at you like this is magic, because they were going out to the track, and if something broke, they're like, right, okay, I'll go and get my camera. Okay, I've got my camera. Let's take pictures from different angles. Right, now I'm going to go and get my laptop and plug it into my laptop. Oh, I've got no signal. Okay, I'll wait till I get back to the office, take them all off, copy them to the file system. So, that's like arduous tasks. And so, yeah, things like being able to take a picture, being able to link this new thing that you're creating via geolocation or by using the date to actually know when a race might be. Again, basic stuff for us, but to other people, this just means the world. I think the other side of this is also that we as a community tend to use a lot of fancy words. So when we talk about concepts like progressive enhancement or neural nets or progressive web apps, or even things like VR, people who don't spend their days going to conferences or reading opinionated blog posts on the internet and maybe are just running their business, they don't really understand why something is important to them. And for this reason, I've started making a load of little standalone demos exactly for this reason, because again, being able to hand somebody something, or like just a phone or their phone, where they can go to a website and you can go, okay, now put it in airplane mode, and oh look, it works. Oh, you can add it to your home screen. All of these things people can really relate to, rather than trying to just say these big fancy words at them. So another really important factor in trying to get where you want to go is this idea of trying to get everybody speaking the same language, trying to get everybody doing the same things, and this is where kind of standards and principles come in. So regardless of whether you're laying down how to approach performance, or maybe just things like where and when concepts like AI might be appropriate in your customer interactions, having standards are really, really important so that everybody knows what's going on. And since last year, I've been working down in Poole with the RNLI every now and again. They're the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, and we basically went again through this process of speaking to everybody. We iteratively mapped out this. I basically spend a lot of my time drawing terrifying things on whiteboards. So this is a view of kind of their systems, ecosystem, and everything that they've got going on. And I went through exactly the same areas that we talked about previously with things like the expert reviews. So try to uncover all the issues that they've been facing, trying to look at the root causes, and actually trying to compile those into a set of standards of what are the things that we need to agree on for the future and for now. And this is a document at the moment, which hopefully it won't be for much longer. We've talked about it being transferred onto the web, becoming this public resource and statement about how they actually work, and living alongside things like a pattern library. But what the goal is for it to act as not only a reference for people like partners, so that if they hire in agencies, the agencies know they should expect to build to these kind of accessibility criteria or these performance standards. But it also helps internally. So that internal education piece is really crucial, because sometimes people are scared to ask questions, and sometimes they don't know whether this particular set of requirements should be built with certain technologies or not, or whether they should be putting that into their briefs, or it's scary for people. Technology can be scary, and so trying to give them enough things to help them can be really, really powerful. So standards can be basically like a reference, a way to make sure we're all working the same way. But what doesn't work is just to plonk down this set of rules. And if you've ever tried to do that with coding standards, you can find that it just doesn't really work. So it does need to be a conversation, and you need to basically be able to understand why people are doing something and how best to apply it. And you also need to make sure that there is this educational piece. So you need to provide people with things like documentation and tutorials and assets to help. And so what I found, again, is that if you're just coming onto a project and doing some work and then going away again, the job gets done, but people don't learn. And actually, sometimes people really want to learn. And it's again, really nice to kind of try and impart some of your knowledge, even if it's just what a concept means or what the web can do outside of this really narrow task that you've been tasked to do. Now, getting the right team, if we want to build a team to make change happen, team is important, as I've said, but you've actually got power on both sides. So if you work in-house somewhere, that's really, really important, because you need people to kind of take ownership and drive things along, rather than it just being people flitting in and out and dropping in and doing something, and then nobody else actually realize why it's important. But if you are an outsider, again, sometimes when you come in places, they can be in their little bubbles, and so actually breaking in, trying to share that knowledge, but finding an ally so you can actually impart things into people's brains so that you know it's going to be continued after you leave, that's really important too. So it needs to be a balance, I think, of both sides. And then finally, we want to be able to make sure that with none of this, we don't want to be too dogmatic, we don't want to be coming in and just having the one right way. So be prepared to change your direction and compromise. And sometimes people are set on a particular direction for a reason. And something I saw recently was that Ethan Marcotte wrote a really great article on his experiences of discussing off-the-shelf websites themes with not-for-profits. So they couldn't really afford either the time or the money or just the energy, really, to to go through this lovely, beautiful, bespoke website redesign. So Ethan's been looking at some of the themes that are available, and he found two really common threads, which were organizations aren't necessarily aware they need to care about site speed, and that given the time and resources available to them, they can't always prioritize site speed over other business needs. And this point is really important. So if an organization's work is actually more important than a website, there's no amount of kind of education, hey, you should be focusing on performance. You should absolutely be making a progressive web app. These are all the things that are going to make a difference. Because if it comes down to spending that money and time on saving somebody's life or just a website, let's face it, people's lives are actually more important. So in those instances, maybe, again, trying to think on how you can help those people to do things more broadly. How can they do things more efficiently, more effectively? Can we use the web to do things beyond this public marketing website, potentially? And sometimes just don't engineer. And as Jessica said yesterday, sometimes spreadsheets are good. We like spreadsheets. They don't all have to be replaced. So over the last 2 days, we've looked at where the web has come from, some of the really old things that we've sort of programmed and how we've got here, and we've looked into the future. So when you leave, I'd really like you to go back to your projects to look at both. Not only what's been done, but also think about what you haven't done yet and where those gaps might be. So remember that websites can be really useful because they ground us in reality. They can shine this magnifying glass on all the problems that we have. And hopefully there we can look underneath and fix those root causes to make our problems better, but also to look a bit more broadly as well, and to think outside of just developing things, looking at how people and culture and processes and all the other things can actually have an impact. And this, for me, is the reason why I really like this whole idea of digital transformation, because it doesn't just need to be a stupid buzzword. It can actually be something that we can do regardless of role, and we can actually, as developers, be really well placed to make change happen because we can just make stuff and put it out there. So that's kind of my call to you. Go and see what you can make better in the world, really. Thank you very much.